The rain pounded against the windows like an unwelcome visitor desperate for entry. Margaret stood at her kitchen counter, her fingers trembling as they gripped the crisp white envelope. 63 years had carved lines into her face, lines that deepened now as she read the return address. Her son's handwriting, after months of silence. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. With one swift motion that belied her age, she tore the envelope in half, then quarters, then eighths, until the pieces fluttered from her fingers like confetti from a joyless celebration. She couldn't read another cold, accusatory message. Not today. Not when the wound of his absence still felt as fresh as the day he'd walked out, his parting words still ringing in her ears. As long as you can't accept her, you don't deserve to have either of us in your life. Her, of course, meaning Emily, the woman who had stolen her son's heart, then shattered it. The woman Margaret had never trusted, with her modern ideas and casual dismissal of tradition. The woman who now had custody of her grandson 4 days a week. Margaret's gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where a faded photograph clung desperately to the surface, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. The photo showed the three of them, David, Emily, and herself, at Christmas 2 years ago. David's arm was draped around Emily's shoulder, his smile wide and genuine. Margaret stood slightly apart, her smile tight, eyes watchful. Even then, she'd known that the girl wasn't right for her son, known that disaster lurked behind that picture-perfect facade. She hadn't expected to be right. She hadn't wanted to be right. The divorce had been ugly, as divorces often are. But the true casualty hadn't been the marriage. It had been Margaret's relationship with her son. David had chosen sides, and he hadn't chosen his mother's. "She poisoned him against me," Margaret muttered to the empty room, a habit she'd developed in the crushing silence of her home. "Turned my own flesh and blood against me." The laptop on her dining table glowed with soft blue light, the only brightness in the shadow-filled house. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and sat down heavily in the wooden chair. The support group website was still open from earlier that morning, Healing Broken Family Bonds. She'd joined 3 weeks ago, desperate for some connection, some understanding from people who knew what it was like to lose a child who was still very much alive. Her eyes scanned the private message board, landing on a post that made her breath catch. "Does anyone else feel like they're mourning someone who hasn't died? My ex-husband has cut me off from his family completely. His mother never liked me anyway, but now I miss even her cold stares. At least then I was still part of something. Now I'm just floating." The username was simply Lily, with no photo, no personal details. Just raw emotion that struck Margaret like a physical blow. Before she could second-guess herself, Margaret clicked reply and began typing. "Dear Lily, yes. Every day feels like a funeral where I'm the only mourner. My son hasn't spoken to me since his divorce. He blames me for not embracing his choice of wife. Maybe he's right, but a mother knows things, sees things. I saw how wrong she was for him from the beginning. Now I've lost him anyway, and my grandson too." Her finger hovered over the send button. Was this wise, revealing such personal pain to a stranger? But wasn't that the point of the group, to find understanding where none existed in your real life? Margaret hit send, then closed the laptop quickly, as if afraid the words might leap back out at her. 3 hours later, after a dinner of reheated soup eaten alone at her kitchen table, Margaret checked the website again. A notification blinked on her screen, a private message. "I understand more than you know. My ex-mother-in-law never gave me a chance. In her eyes, I was never good enough for her precious son. I tried so hard to please her, to fit into the mold she had created, but it was like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Now I wonder if she was right all along. Maybe I wasn't good enough, but I loved him. I still do. And our son asks about his grandmother, and I don't know what to tell him." Across town, in a small apartment with walls painted a cheerful yellow that now seemed to mock her, Emily closed her laptop, and pressed her fingers to her temples. Why had she responded? What good could come from conversing with a woman who sounded so much like her former mother-in-law, judgmental, convinced of her own righteousness? But something in the raw honesty of the message had touched her. The pain was real, even if the perspective was flawed, and Emily was so desperately lonely. David was supportive but distant, focused on his own healing. Her friends had taken sides or drifted away, uncomfortable with the messy reality of a failed marriage. Her fingers moved to the locket around her neck. Inside was a picture of her son, Jake, his smile missing 2 front teeth. He was the reason she got up every morning, the reason she put one foot in front of the other. "Mommy?" Jake's voice came from the doorway of her bedroom, small and sleepy. "I had a bad dream." Emily opened her arms and he climbed onto her lap, his small body warm against hers. "It's okay, sweet boy. Mommy's here." "I dreamed about Grandma," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I dreamed she forgot me." Emily's heart twisted. "No one could ever forget you," she whispered, stroking his hair. "Not ever." Later, after tucking Jake back into bed, Emily returned to her laptop. Her cursor hovered over the delete button for the conversation. She should end this now. Nothing good could come from forming connections with strangers online, especially ones who reminded her of painful relationships. Instead, she began to type again. "I wonder sometimes if we create these divides ourselves. If pride and fear build walls that love could easily tear down, if only we'd let it. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of hurting. I don't even know your name, but your words feel like home." Miles away, Margaret read these words with tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, someone seemed to understand the complicated tangle of love and disappointment, of righteousness and regret that had become her life. "I'm tired too," she wrote back. "So very tired." The storm outside had finally stopped, leaving behind a silence punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Margaret felt the faintest stirring of hope. 3 weeks passed, and the letters between Margaret and Lily became a lifeline for both women. Each morning, Margaret woke with a sense of purpose that had been absent since David's departure. There would be a message waiting, thoughts and feelings shared in the vulnerable hours of night. And each evening, Emily sat down to compose her response after Jake was asleep, finding unexpected solace in the connection with this anonymous woman. They never mentioned their real names or specific locations. Some unspoken agreement kept their exchanges in this liminal space, intimate yet safe, real yet removed from the complicated realities of their lives. "I dreamed of my son last night," Margaret wrote one Tuesday morning. "He was a little boy again, maybe 6 or 7, and he'd fallen off his bicycle. In the dream, I ran to him, but when I reached out to help him up, he turned into a grown man and looked at me with such disappointment. 'Too late,' he said. 'You're always too late.' I woke up crying." Emily read the message while stirring pancake batter, Jake sitting at the kitchen table drawing dinosaurs with crayons that left colorful smudges on the wooden surface. The words struck her with unexpected force. Had Margaret's son, this stranger's son, felt the same way about his mother that David had about his? Too controlled, too judgmental, too late in showing the acceptance he craved? "Dreams have a way of distilling our fears into their purest form," she wrote back later. "I wonder if your son feels that way, or if it's your own fear speaking. I find myself questioning my memories lately. Was my mother-in-law truly as cold as I remember? Or was I too sensitive, too quick to perceive judgment in her silence? Memory is such a tricky thing, colored by our pain." The next day, Emily took Jake to the park after school. As he raced toward the swing set, his backpack still bouncing against his small shoulders, she noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench across the playground. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, hands folded in her lap, watching the children with a kind of hungry sadness that Emily recognized instantly. For one wild moment, she thought it might be Margaret. her Margaret, David's mother. But as the woman turned, Emily saw an unfamiliar face. Still, the resemblance to what she imagined her online confidant might look like was striking enough that Emily felt a strange doubling sensation. What would she do if she encountered her former mother-in-law here? Would they speak? Would they acknowledge each other at all? "Higher, Mummy! Push me higher!" Jake called from the swings, jolting Emily back to the present moment. As she pushed her son on the swing, Emily thought about the woman on the other end of these letters. Was she out somewhere too, watching children play and wondering which one might be her grandson? Did she visit parks, hoping for a glimpse of her son's child? That night, emboldened by the encounter, Emily wrote, "I never told my mother-in-law how much her silence hurt me. She never raised her voice. But her silence made me feel like I never belonged, like I was being measured and found wanting. I wish I had spoken up. I wish I had asked her just once what I could do to earn her approval." Margaret read these words in her garden the next morning, coffee growing cold beside her as birds called to each other in the early light. Emily's words, no, Lily's words, cut through her defenses with surgical precision. Had she done that to Emily? Created that feeling of perpetual judgment, of conditional acceptance? She remembered the way Emily would grow quiet whenever Margaret visited, how her laughter would become more subdued, her movements more careful. At the time, Margaret had interpreted this as evidence of Emily's artifice, putting on an act for her mother-in-law. Now, with Lily's words burning in her mind, she wondered if it had been fear all along. "I thought I was protecting my son," Margaret wrote back, her hands shaking slightly. "But maybe I was just protecting my own pride. Maybe I wasn't ready to not be the most important woman in his life. I saw every difference between us, between me and my daughter-in-law, as a challenge rather than an opportunity to grow, to learn." The admission felt like letting blood from a wound, painful, but somehow cleansing. In her apartment, Emily read this message during her lunch break at work, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside her computer. The words stirred something deep inside her, a recognition, a possibility. "We mirror each other, you and I," she wrote that evening. "Different sides of the same painful equation. I wonder what would have happened if my mother-in-law and I had been able to have this kind of conversation. If we had been able to see past our roles to the real people underneath." Margaret's response came quickly, as if she'd been waiting by her computer. "I believe we would have found, as I've found with you, that the differences that seemed so important were actually quite small compared to what we shared. Love for the same people, fear of not being enough, desire to protect our families." That night, both women dreamed of reconciliation, different dreams, but with the same aching current of longing running through them. The next day, a Thursday, brought rain again. Margaret stood at her kitchen window watching water stream down the glass, distorting the view of her garden. She was thinking about Emily, not Lily, but Emily, for the first time in months without the sharp edge of resentment. What was she doing right now? Was she happy? Was Jake? The thought of her grandson sent a piercing pain through her chest. He would be different now. Children changed so quickly at that age. Was he still obsessed with dinosaurs? Did he still sleep with the blue blanket she had knitted for him before he was born? Without fully intending to, Margaret found herself reaching for a photo album on the shelf. She hadn't looked at these pictures since before the divorce. It hurt too much. But now she turned the pages slowly, tracing the outline of Jake's face with one finger. His 5th birthday party. Christmas morning. A day at the beach where his small hands had built a sandcastle that was washed away minutes later by an unexpected wave. In one photo, Emily was holding Jake on her hip, her face turned toward him with an expression of such pure love that Margaret had to catch her breath. How had she missed that? How had she seen this woman, who clearly adored her grandson, who had given him life, as an enemy rather than an ally? "I saw a picture today that changed everything," she wrote to Lily that night. "A moment captured in time that I never fully saw when it was happening. The love in her eyes, my son's wife looking at their child, It was the same love I felt. The very same. How could I have been so blind? Across town, Emily sat on her couch with a glass of wine, reading these words with a strange sense of déjà vu. Earlier that day, while searching for Jake's birth certificate for school registration, she had come across her wedding album. Despite her better judgment, she had opened it, allowing herself to revisit that day. There was a photo she had never particularly noticed before. Margaret adjusting David's boutonniere before the ceremony, her expression a complex mixture of pride and loss. How had Emily never seen the vulnerability there? The fear of being replaced? "I think," Emily wrote in response, "that we see what we expect to see. I expected judgment, so I found it in every glance, every comment. She expected opposition, so she found it in my every decision. We created the very dynamic we feared most." As she typed these words, Emily felt a strange doubling again, as if she were writing about herself in the third person, as if Lily and her mother-in-law had somehow become proxies for herself and Margaret. The feeling was so strong that for a moment Emily wondered, could it be possible? No, the coincidence would be too extreme. Wouldn't it? "I wonder," she continued, her heart suddenly racing, "what would happen if we could start again? If we could meet each other as we are now, with open hearts and no expectations?" Margaret stared at these words for a long time before responding. The same question had been forming in her own mind. "I believe," she wrote finally, "that we would find we were both wrong, and both right, and that the truth, and the possibility of healing, lies somewhere in between." The morning brought an unusual warmth for early spring, as if the weather itself had decided to offer a brief respite from the lingering chill. Margaret sat in her garden, laptop balanced on her knees, surrounded by the first tentative blooms of the season. She had been pondering her last exchange with Lily all night, the words turning over and over in her mind like smooth stones in a river. There was something shifting between them, some deepening of trust that both exhilarated and terrified her. The anonymity that had made their connection possible now felt like an obstacle, a thin membrane separating authentic connection from complete understanding. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Today, she would share something she had never spoken aloud, not even to herself in the quiet darkness of sleepless nights. "I keep thinking about a moment in the hospital, after my grandson was born," she began, the words coming slowly at first, then in a rush. Everyone had left the room except for me and my daughter-in-law. She looked exhausted, beautiful in that raw way that new mothers have. Hair matted with sweat, eyes bright with a mixture of fatigue and wonder. She was holding the baby, looking down at him, and I stood there, wanting to tell her how brave she had been, how strong, how much I admired what she had just done. Margaret paused, the memory so vivid she could almost smell the antiseptic hospital air, feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against her chest. But I said nothing. I straightened the blanket around the baby and commented on how much he looked like my son when he was born. And I saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. An opportunity lost. I think about that moment often. How different things might have been if I had spoken the words in my heart, instead of hiding behind safer observations. Miles away, in her small office at work, Emily nearly dropped her coffee mug. The words on her screen could have been written by Margaret herself. The detail of the hospital room, the specific memory of that moment that Emily, too, had revisited countless times. Her hands trembled as she minimized the message, trying to collect her thoughts. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet, the timing aligned. The circumstances matched exactly. That precise moment in the hospital had indeed happened just as described, down to the comment about Jake resembling David. Emily remembered it vividly, remembered the crushing disappointment when Margaret had focused on the baby's resemblance to David, rather than acknowledging what Emily had just accomplished. What were the odds that this woman, this stranger who had become so important to her, could describe that exact scene if she wasn't actually there? "Emily, are you okay?" Her co-worker's voice startled her back to awareness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Emily managed, forcing a smile. "Just remembered something I forgot to do." When lunchtime came, Emily didn't join her colleagues in the break room. Instead, she took her sandwich to a bench outside, needing privacy, needing air. Her mind raced with possibilities. If her online confidant was truly Margaret, what did that mean? Had she been manipulated? Was this some elaborate scheme to gather information, to use against her somehow? No, that didn't align with the genuine vulnerability in their exchanges. If anything, Lily had been even more open than Emily herself. With shaking hands, she opened her laptop and began to type a response. That moment in the hospital, I felt it too. That was the time I most wanted, needed, to hear something from her. Some acknowledgement that transcended our differences. I had just brought life into the world, had been torn open and put back together. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, I would have given anything for her to see me. Really see me. Not as her son's wife, not as the mother of her grandchild, but as a woman who had just done something terrifying and miraculous. She paused, heart pounding. Should she reveal more? Drop hints about her identity? Or wait and see if this remarkable coincidence, if that's what it was, developed further? How cruel is fate, she continued, choosing her words carefully. To give me too late, the moment we should have had face to face. Margaret read this message in her garden as the afternoon sun began its slow descent. A strange sensation crept up her spine. Recognition, possibility, fear. The specificity of the response mirroring her own memory from the other side of that hospital room. It couldn't be coincidence. Could it? Her mind raced back through their weeks of correspondence, searching for clues she might have missed. Had Lily ever mentioned her son's name? Her grandson's? No, they had been careful with those details, but the circumstances, the emotions, the timing of events. It can't be, Margaret whispered to her empty garden. Emily. The idea was simultaneously the most far-fetched and the most obvious conclusion. Who else could understand her pain so precisely from the opposite perspective? Who else could respond to her specific memories with such perfect counterpoint? If it was Emily, if she had been baring her soul to her estranged daughter-in-law all this time, what did that mean? What happened now? Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. If their connection was real, and it felt more real than anything in her life right now, did it matter who was on the other end? They had seen each other, truly seen each other, perhaps for the first time. They had moved beyond roles and expectations to something authentic. With a deep breath, Margaret began typing again. I've been thinking about what makes relationships fail or thrive. I think we fear seeing people as they really are because it requires us to be seen in return. It's safer to interact with our idea of someone than to face the messy reality of their true self, their weaknesses, their needs, their humanity. She paused, gathering courage. I wonder if you and I have been able to connect because we don't know who we're writing to. We have no history to overcome, no roles to play. We're just two women sharing our truths. But what if... Her fingers faltered on the keys. What if we did know each other? What if our paths had crossed in real life? Would this connection still be possible? Or would our preconceptions get in the way again? Emily read this message on her phone while waiting to pick up Jake from school, her mind spinning with implications. Was Margaret also suspecting? Was she afraid, curious, looking for confirmation? The school bell rang, and children began pouring out of the building. Emily watched as Jake emerged, his backpack almost as big as he was, his face lighting up when he spotted her. Her heart swelled with love so intense it was almost painful. "Mom," he called, racing toward her. "Guess what? Miss Thompson said my dinosaur drawing was the best in the class." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Emily hugged him close, breathing in the familiar smell of crayons and playground dust. "I can't wait to see it." As they walked to the car, Jake chattering excitedly about his day, Emily thought about Margaret. Was she watching other children Jake's age, wondering which activities her grandson excelled at now? Did she feel this same fierce love, this same aching absence? That night, after Jake was asleep, Emily sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine, staring at Margaret's message. There was only one way forward, she realized. Truth. I've been having the strangest feeling lately, she wrote. That you and I are connected in ways beyond this correspondence. That perhaps our paths have crossed before. There's something in your descriptions, your memories, that feels hauntingly familiar. She took a deep breath, then continued. You mentioned a hospital room, a new mother, a grandmother's unspoken admiration. The scene you described, it feels like my own memory, but from the other side of the room. Is it possible that we're not strangers after all? Is it possible that fate, or chance, or whatever forces govern such things, has brought together two women who couldn't connect in person but somehow found each other here, in this anonymous space? Emily's finger hovered over the send button. Once she sent this, there would be no going back. The safe, healing space they had created might collapse under the weight of reality. But wasn't truth painful, complicated, necessary truth what they had been moving toward all along? She clicked send. In her home across town, Margaret was preparing for bed when the notification arrived. She read Emily's message with her heart in her throat, each word confirming what she had begun to suspect. It was her. It had been her all along. The revelation should have been shocking, should have sent her reeling. Instead, Margaret felt a strange sense of rightness, as if some cosmic hand had guided them to this moment of recognition. With trembling hands, she began to type her response, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The world outside Margaret's window had grown dark, but she didn't rise to turn on more lights. The dim glow from her laptop screen illuminated her face as she stared at Emily's message, reading it again and again, each word confirming what her heart already knew. They had found each other in the vast digital wilderness. Two souls connected through words, through shared pain, through an understanding that had eluded them in person. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret, that she had finally seen Emily, truly seen her, only when she didn't know who she was looking at. Her response came slowly, each word carefully chosen. I believe you're right. The coincidences are too specific. The memories too aligned. I've been sitting here trying to process what this means. That the woman I've come to care for so deeply over these weeks might be the same woman I once held at such a distance. There's something almost miraculous in it, isn't there? That we could find each other this way, stripped of our history, our defenses. Margaret paused, tears blurring her vision. Then, with a deep breath, she continued. I think I've known, on some level, for a little while now. There's been a resonance to our exchanges that went beyond mere empathy. You understood my pain too perfectly, from the exact opposite perspective. If you are who I think you are, if you are my son's former wife, my grandson's mother, then I need to say something I should have said years ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the ways I failed you, for the approval I withheld, for the connection I was too afraid to forge. Her fingers trembled over the keys as she typed the final lines. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that this correspondence has been real for me. That the woman I've come to know through these letters is someone I respect, someone I care about, someone I wish I had allowed myself to know sooner. With a racing heart, she hit send, then sat back in her chair, feeling as though she had just jumped from a great height with no certainty of what awaited below. Across town, Emily sat curled on her couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the spring evening's chill. When the notification appeared, her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone. The message confirmed everything. It was Margaret. Had been Margaret all along. A storm of emotions battled within her. Shock, vindication, fear, hope. She had been conversing with the woman who had made her feel so inadequate for years, the woman whose approval she had desperately sought and never received. And in this anonymous space, they had connected, had seen, and been seen. Emily closed her eyes, remembering the cutting remarks, the disapproving glances, the way Margaret had always made her feel like an intruder in her son's life, rather than his chosen partner. But then she thought of their recent exchanges, the vulnerability, the honesty, the hard-won wisdom. Which version was real? Perhaps both were. Perhaps people were always more complicated than the roles they played in each other's stories. After several minutes of deep breathing, Emily began to type her response. Yes, it's me. Emily, Jake's mother, David's ex-wife, your former daughter-in-law. I can barely believe it myself, that fate or chance would bring us together like this, that we would find connection in anonymity when we couldn't find it face to face. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm shaking as I write this. Part of me is afraid that knowing who I am will change everything, that you'll retreat behind the walls we built between us years ago. But another part of me hopes, believes, that what we've found here is stronger than our history, that we've glimpsed something true about each other that can't be unseen. Emily took a deep breath and continued. I've been angry for so long, hurt, convinced that you never gave me a fair chance, that you had decided who I was before you ever knew me. But these weeks of writing to you, of being seen by you, have helped me understand that we were both protecting ourselves in the only ways we knew how. Both afraid of being pushed aside, of losing our place in David's life, in Jake's life. Her fingers flew over the keyboard now, the words pouring out. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if this revelation heals us or breaks us all over again. But I do know that the Margaret I've come to know through these letters is someone I would like to know in person. Someone Jake should know. Someone who has more wisdom and compassion than I ever gave her credit for. Emily hesitated over the send button, then added one final line. I think we know each other. Far more than we thought. And maybe that's enough to start again. She sent the message, then set her phone down, her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever happened next would change everything, for her, for Jake, possibly even for David. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. In her dimly lit living room, Margaret read Emily's confirmation with tears streaming down her face. It was real. She hadn't imagined the connection, hadn't misinterpreted the signs. The woman she had come to care for, to respect, to admire, was Emily. Her Emily. The woman she had once viewed as an adversary was now someone she couldn't imagine not having in her life. The realization hit her with physical force, and she had to stand, had to move. She paced her living room, her mind racing with memories, moments with Emily and David where she had been closed off, judgmental. Moments with Jake where she had been so focused on her son's absence that she'd failed to fully appreciate the miracle of her grandson's presence. A sudden wind rose outside, rattling the windows as if to mirror the storm inside her. Margaret moved to look out at the darkened street, at the trees bending in the strengthening gale. How fitting that nature itself seemed to be responding to this moment of revelation, this upheaval of everything she had believed about her relationship with Emily. After several minutes of standing at the window, watching the storm gather strength, Margaret returned to her laptop. Her response came from someplace deep within her, someplace she hadn't accessed in years. Emily, reading your name feels strange after all these weeks of knowing you only as Lily. Strange and yet somehow right. Like finally putting a name to a face you've known all your life. She paused, searching for the right words. I'm sitting here in the half-dark, watching a storm build outside, thinking about all the time we've lost. All the moments we could have shared if I had been brave enough to make room in my heart for you from the beginning. If I had seen you as an addition to our family rather than a threat to my place in it. Margaret wiped away tears with the back of her hand, then continued typing. I don't know what happens next either. I don't know if David would understand or approve of this unexpected connection between us, but I do know that I don't want to lose what we've found here. That the Emily I've come to know through these letters is someone I want in my life. Someone I need in my life. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed the final lines. Perhaps we could meet, for coffee or tea, somewhere neutral. We could look into each other's eyes and see if the connection we've found in words translates to the real world. I'm terrified of suggesting this, terrified that seeing each other will shatter the understanding we've built. But I'm more terrified of going back to silence, to absence, to not having you, and through you, Jake, in my life again. She hit send before she could lose her nerve, then sat back, suddenly exhausted. It was nearly midnight. Too late for a response, surely. Emily would be asleep, or would need time to process this proposal. Margaret should go to bed, try to rest. Instead, she remained by her laptop, watching as the storm outside grew in intensity, as rain began to lash against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance. She felt oddly calm in the midst of this meteorological drama, as if her own internal storm had been quieted by the simple act of truth-telling. Emily was still awake when Margaret's message arrived. She had been unable to sleep, her mind racing with implications, with possibilities. The suggestion of a meeting sent a jolt of anxiety through her, but also a thrill of anticipation. To see Margaret again, not as adversaries, but as… what? Friends? Family? Something new that had no name yet. Before she could overthink it, Emily typed her response. Yes, let's meet. Tomorrow? There's a small cafe on Maple Street, the Blue Door. 10 a.m.? Unless that's too soon. I understand if you need more time. Margaret's reply came almost instantly. Tomorrow is perfect. 10 a.m. at the Blue Door. I'll be there. Emily stared at the confirmation, hardly able to believe that tomorrow, after all this time, she would be face to face with Margaret again. Not as David's wife, not as Jake's mother, but as herself, as the woman Margaret had come to know through words alone. Mom? Jake's small voice came from the doorway of the living room. I heard thunder. Emily opened her arms and he climbed onto her lap, warm and sleepy. It's just a storm, sweetheart. Nothing to be afraid of. Can I sleep with you tonight? He asked, his eyes already drifting closed again. Of course you can, Emily whispered, stroking his hair. As she carried her son to her bedroom, Emily thought about tomorrow's meeting, about what it might mean for Jake to have his grandmother back in his life, about what it might mean for all of them to find a new way forward, one built on understanding rather than assumptions. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. Morning arrived with that peculiar clarity that often follows a storm, the air washed clean, colors more vivid, the world seeming somehow both older and newer simultaneously. Margaret stood before her closet, scrutinizing her options with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. What does one wear to meet a woman who has seen your soul, but not your face? A woman who was once family, then stranger, and now something undefined, but precious. She settled on a blue dress she hadn't worn since before the estrangement, something Emily would not associate with the old Margaret. As she fastened a simple silver necklace around her throat, her hands trembled slightly. Fear mingled with anticipation in equal measure. It's just coffee, she said aloud to her reflection. But they both knew it was so much more. What would you do if the person you misunderstood the most turned out to be the one who understood you best? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances.